All right. Week 8 in CIT93. JavaScript. Love me some JavaScript. Hopefully you're loving JavaScript. I know I've talked to a couple of you who had previous programming experience and you seem to be enjoying it. Depends on how strongly typed your consciousness is around programming. Can often be your determinant of how well you're liking JavaScript. So anyway, in this week, we finish coding the CRUD operations, the create, the read, the update, and delete. We jump over the update and we come back to it in the discussion. So just to kind of give you a hint of where we're heading. But before we get into talking about, the actual work for this week, and actually this is part of the work, is for the first item, which is your conditional DOM rendering. Before we actually get into the conditional DOM rendering, and conditional in this case we introduced back when we were writing some of our first weeks of code, right? What's a condition is an if, right? Maybe a if else, some kind of conditional operator, that and or, right? So we use conditionals to make decisions in logic in code. So this is a good time for us to review this because in week 9, which is next week, you're going to have your first time that you're going to be writing some code on your own. Now, when I say that, that can invoke various concerns, right? But here's what I would say is that we have now coded a design pattern of creating a CRUD app. There are other design patterns to use for this. And you can use that as a guide to help you, but you will end up writing your own logic, right? Logic meaning conditional statements, right? So this is a good time for us to kind of go back and look at conditionals again. Now the way we're going to look at them is pretty simple. It's very simple, but that's okay too, because just getting reintroduced to them would be helpful. Now, I say that because before we get into actually talking about conditionals as the first thing in the first code along, you're going to do something that is really beneficial as we move closer to the code review, because at this point we have a bit of code. There's a bit of code. We have modules, so we have files that have just the render, we have files that have just the carbon footprint, right? So in this case, what I'm going to have you do is first attempt, you'll create a README file. Again, this is in the video, but I want you to know the importance of this step, is that you will then write your understanding of what that code is doing, okay? And then you'll commit it with your understanding. And this is a really good check because students often will ask me, how do I prep for the code review? This is a great step. It's not complete, but it is a great step. You understand the code at this point, right? Now, this is actually more code that for your decision app. Remember, the code review could cover anything we've coded so far and the code you've written for your decision app. So at this point, having a really good grasp of that is helpful. So then what I will have you do is I will actually go through in the video, right? So in the video, I will walk through the code and then you can see, based on your understanding, maybe where you needed to fill in some gaps. And then you can update that understanding because it can serve, again, as a way to help you review or prepare for the code review. Now, I say in here, give me feedback in your README file. And I would also say update that understanding so that it is it will help you gain and further your knowledge. Okay, so I just want to give you that the important part of what you're going to do as we step into rendering conditionally. Now the other thing is we're going to end up bringing back the buttons, and we'll write event listeners for the buttons, and then ultimately we end up here to actually do the update. So how once the user gives us input, the C, we read that input back. We have buttons that have action. Then we write code for those buttons. One of those, of course, is the all-important edit, representing the U in CRUD. And then how do we handle that? And the way that I handle it And in this case, the idea of an event handler, but also the idea of just writing in a design pattern. The design pattern I'm going to write, the UN, is a hack. Now, this term hack can invoke different images for people, but if you've been around IT for any length of time, I'm guessing you may have been exposed to people who hacking is actually a positive term. It's not a negative term. Oftentimes when I meet people who are not in IT and I bring this up, they think I'm talking about hackers, right? People who mean harm. But in the culture of IT, I think this is still mostly true, that when we use the term hack, it just basically means I got something working. I hacked it. I made it work. May not be the best solution. Now that's kind of why I'm prefacing this, and that's really why I'm wearing this t-shirt today, which, by the way, this is one of my favorite t-shirts in the world. I got it at Google when we were doing hackathons there. I was doing some fun work there. It was such a good time to actually hack at things, and we were doing it, we called it hack for good, right? So we actually were writing code that was helping in advance particular social consciousness issues, or just trying to make the world a better place in a more simpler way. Okay, so when you get to that, then you're going to end up, right, you're going to attempt a solution for doing the edit, right, and then I will have a solution again. Now this week, like I did last week, I've put the solution after the discussion. So, and I've given basically, I think the way I would now articulate this is you have three options for the way you can approach discussion boards, right? You can get us a working solution, reply, post your link, and tell us what you did. How did you approach it? Two, you could get as far as you could and then ask for help. As I've said before, this asking for help thing means you need to work ahead of the due date in order to get help in a timely manner. Remember, Discord is still out there. Okay? The other option I'm giving, and this week I've articulated a little clearer, I think, hopefully, is that first you do write some code. You attempt the code, right? And then you commit with that, this is my attempt. Then you go watch the solution, you get working code, and then you come back to your post and you update it and you tell us what you've learned through that process. Okay? Because remember, the idea is sometimes these challenges, as I said last week, start stepping up a bit. And again, this is part of learning to code, is being challenged to try to extend your skill. And if you are not ready for that, watch a solution that helps you understand one path to doing that. Okay, so that's kind of the setup for this week. Now, the other thing is when I end up iterating over the object, and I do it with something called object entries. A little foreshadowing later. I almost changed this, but I decided to leave it the way it is. Well, one of the students, I really appreciate this, last semester, sent me a message a couple weeks after just doing this, and he had found a discussion on Stack Overflow about the order of the key and the values in iterating over using object.entries, which you're going to learn this week. And so it could create, because it may not be in order, and the order at which we build the object that's inside the array. So we end up fixing that later, just to foreshadow what's coming. But if you run into that and you're finding that when you're building the table with code that it doesn't come out exactly right, that it might be in a different order, that could be why. And we end up, just to tell you how I ended up finding rather than do object.keys, I just created an array and iterated over the fields that I wanted. The keys that I wanted. That's what I ended up changing. But I think it's good to see object.entries, so that's why I was totally okay leaving it in there. Okay, so as a reply, what do I want here? All right, so of course, any question related to that. Have you heard the term hack? hacking in your understanding is, what's your feeling about this word hack or hacking, right? So two different works, of course. One, actively hacking, but in the culture, they actually even have a different meaning, as I alluded to before. So what's your, like, when you hear that term, what do you think of? And know that when I do the example of how I look at my solution, which we will start with in week 9, it's a hack. And there are definitely, there's other ways. One of the students last semester did a modal. I've been thinking about doing that because I will re-record this content next semester, so after summer. I'll probably do that. But I thought it's fine the way it is. Not a bad thing to hack something up because when we're just beginning to learn something, sometimes we just want to make something work. Like, you just want to make it work. We know it's not the best solution, but at least it gets the job done. Okay. All right. Enough from me. Have a great week. I'll talk to you soon.